Every country in the world is in debt. Even the most powerful country on earth, the United States of America, today, has more than $38 trillion in debt. This represents the highest level in its history. The European Union has approximately 14 trillion in debt. Japan's debt has reached nearly 9 trillion. Even oil-rich countries, for example Arabia, Azerbaijan, or export states like Germany and China owe enormous amounts. But here is the paradox. If everyone is in debt, then who is the creditor? This is where the field of the historical financier begins, the place where money, power, and history collide, and nothing is actually as it seems. Debt is not a problem. It is an indispensable part of the modern world. Every war, every internal state problem, every growth and collapse rests on this invisible skeleton called IOUs. If you follow the chain of creditors long enough, you encounter a frightening reality. The world is not in debt to a specific someone. It is in debt to itself. But that does not mean it is distributed equally to everyone. To understand how we arrived at the current situation, where total global debt exceeds $315 trillion, nearly 3 times the size of the global economy, let's go back to the very beginning. Long before credit card transactions or digital transfers existed, centuries ago, the idea of national debt was born not on Wall Street, but in war. In 1694, England was at war with France, and its gold was rapidly running out. The king turned to the country's merchants for help. In exchange for a permanent stream of interest payments secured by future taxes, they financed the crown. To manage this new arrangement, the Bank of England was established. This was revolutionary. The state had found a way to spend money it did not yet have. In return, the lenders received something priceless, a promise from the government, a promise that could be bought, sold, and transferred. This was the birth of the government bond. The seed of the modern financial system was planted here. France copied this for its own country. The Netherlands developed it further. The newly independent United States adopted it to finance its revolution, and later its westward expansion. National debt did not mean failure. The ability to borrow was the ability to govern. Empires once conquered land to find gold, slaughtering people in the process. Now they were simply issuing bonds to extract interest. The battlefield had become the balance sheet. 3 centuries later, debt has become a basic necessity of the world. The United States owes $38 trillion. Japan owes over $9 trillion. Global borrowing increases by $1 trillion every 100 days. Now every country is in debt. Every bank lends. Every citizen, through taxes, savings, and pensions, is both a debtor and a creditor. So who is holding the other end of the rope? Let's start with the biggest one, the United States of America, because its debt is not only national but global. Half of this $38 trillion is publicly held debt, that is, debt owed to investors rather than to other government institutions. About 2/3 of these investors are American banks, pension funds, mutual funds, insurance companies, and the Federal Reserve itself. The remaining third, about $9 trillion, is held by foreigners. Japan is the largest holder with about $1 trillion, followed by China with roughly $800 billion. Then come the United Kingdom, Luxembourg, and Belgium. So when people say the U.S. is indebted to China, that is true, but only for about 2% of the total. Most of the money America owes is owed to America itself. The Treasury issues bond debt. Banks and funds buy it. The Federal Reserve often buys it back and creates new dollars in the process. American citizens pay taxes. Those taxes finance the interest on the bonds. and that interest flows into American retirement accounts. This is a circular cycle. The debt is real, but the creditor is mostly the system itself. This circularity does not belong only to America. It is global. Japan lends to the U.S. through Treasury bonds. The U.S. lends to Europe through the IMF. Europe lends to developing countries through the World Bank. Developing countries, in turn, lend back to advanced economies by parking their foreign exchange reserves in Western bonds. It is a planet-wide game of hot potato, with the only difference being that the potato is made of promises. Every country holds another country's note as collateral. Every promise is secured by another promise. It is as if every player at the table has borrowed their chips from the next one. The only rule that keeps the game alive is that no one leaves the table. But there is a fourth layer, more important than all the rest: the markets themselves. Behind every government bond is a network of institutions: hedge funds, pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, and central banks managing tens of trillions of dollars. They are the real owners of credit. They decide which nation can borrow cheaply and which must pay a premium just to survive. When they lose confidence, currencies collapse, governments fall, and entire economies can be restructured overnight. Democracy decides who will be the boss. Markets decide who stays in the game, and the ultimate market maker of this system, its modern owners, are the central banks. Central banks do not merely manage debt, they produce it. Whenever the Federal Reserve or the European Central Bank buys a government bond, it creates new money in return. What is debt on one balance sheet is an asset on another. Every dollar you see in circulation is actually a debt somewhere else. In other words, there's no such thing as debt-free money. Whether it is a coin, a banknote, or a digital dollar, each one carries an invisible "I owe you" written on it. This system has survived for decades thanks to one thing: trust. As long as investors believe that governments will continue to pay interest, even if they never repay the principal, the system works. But what happens when trust breaks? We have seen this before. In 2010, government debt exploded in Greece. Creditors panicked, interest rates soared. The European Central Bank and the IMF stepped in, but the cost of the rescue was heavy. Taxes rose sharply, spending was cut, and unemployment exploded. For an entire generation, the word rescue was replaced by the word pain. In Argentina, paying debt became almost a national struggle. In Sri Lanka, when the government could not find foreign currency, resources ran out. The system collapsed and politics was torn apart. When things go wrong, creditors suddenly appear. The IMF, credit rating agencies, and anonymous but powerful bondholders. But here is the interesting part. Even after collapse, the system continues in the same way. New debts are issued, old ones are restructured, and everything reappears under a different name. Because in the modern world, debt is not designed to be repaid. It is designed to be rolled over. Governments never actually plan to fully pay off their debt. Not now, not in the future. This is not a secret plan. It is an open policy. When we take out a loan, we are expected to repay it. For states, things do not work that way. They see debt as a subscription sustained by issuing new debt to cover old debt. Economists call this refinancing. What really matters is not the principal, but the interest. For the system, this is rent. The global economy is almost addicted to this rent, like a shark that cannot stop swimming. Today, global finance is based not on repayment, but on belief. The U.S. will never fully pay off its $38 trillion of debt. it will continuously roll it over. Japan has been doing the same for years. Its debt has exceeded 250% of national income, yet interest rates are still almost zero. Because no one asks, will it be repaid? Everyone asks, will it be renewed? Government bonds are no longer thought of as debt. They are seen as assets. Pension funds hold them, banks use them as collateral, and central banks almost treat them like money. The system depends on governments never paying off their debt. Think about it. What would happen if the U.S. one day announced, "We have paid off all our debt"? Banks and funds around the world would instantly lose their safest assets. The supply of dollars would shrink and the system would freeze. In other words, paying off the debt would mean destroying the cornerstone that keeps the system standing. That is why everyone does the opposite. More debt is taken on, but not randomly, in a regular and controlled manner. Debt becomes the heartbeat of capitalism. It pulses through pensions, mortgages, and markets. That is why when politicians say we will eliminate the debt, they are actually lying. The real goal is not to eliminate debt, but to keep it manageable and trustworthy. Because once trust is gone, the numbers mean nothing. Interest rates soar, the system breaks down. This is the true secret of sovereign debt. The plan was never to repay it. The plan was for the world to keep believing it would be repaid. But this system is not fair. The phrase, "we are paying the debt to ourselves," is only half true. Interest does not flow evenly through society. It flows from workers and taxpayers to the institutions that hold the debt. In other words, debt is not only a transfer between countries, it is a transfer between classes. That is why, as global debt increases, inequality increases as well. If this sounds familiar, do not be surprised. It is the same story, just on a larger scale, from households to states, from states to the world. Creditors are not evil, and debtors are not innocent. They are two sides of the same engine. The real question is this: what happens when the engine runs out of fuel? Because at the top of this system, there's no single face to blame. Not China, not Wall Street, not the IMF. All of them, and us. Modern finance has turned debt into money. States issue it, banks multiply it, investors trade it, and people live dependent on it. The line between debtor and creditor has been erased. In the past, debt meant bondage. Today it means balance. But if that balance ever breaks, if trust collapses, we will all remember what debt really is. A promise that cannot be kept forever.